Hare Krishna. We will continue with the chapter How Shall I Serve You? And he liked boldness in his disciples. Abhay heard of an occasion when one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples had been very outspoken at a public meeting and had denounced a highly regarded Mayavadi monk as a foolish priest. The remark had caused a disruption at the meeting, and some of the disciples reported the incident to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, thinking he would be displeased that his disciple had caused a disturbance. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was pleased and remarked, "He has done well." His displeasure occurred rather when he heard of someone's compromise. Srila Prabhupada. When my Guru Maharaj was present, even big scholars were afraid to talk with even his beginning students. My Guru Maharaj was called Living Encyclopedia. He could talk with anyone on any subject, he was so learned, and no compromise. So called saints, avtaras, yogis, everyone who was false was an enemy to my Guru Maharaj. He never compromised. Some god brothers complained that this preaching was a chopping technique and it would not be successful, but those who criticized him fell down. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was known as the Simha, lion guru. On occasion when he saw someone he knew to be a proponent of impersonalism, he would call that person over and challenge. Why are you cheating the people with Mayavadi philosophy? He would often tell his disciples not to compromise. Why should you go flatter? He would say. You should speak the plain truth without any flattery. Money will come anyway. Whenever Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wrote or spoke the Vaishnava philosophy, he was uncompromising. The conclusion was according to the Shastra and the logic strong. But sometimes Abhay would hear his spiritual master express the eternal teachings in a unique way that Abhay knew he would never forget. Don't try to see God, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would say, but act in such a way that God sees you. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta condemned temple proprietors who made a business of showing the deity for a living. To be a sweeper in the street was more honorable, he said. He coined a Bengali phrase, Shalagram Dwara Badam Bhanga. The priests are taking the Shaligram deity as a stone for cracking nuts. In other words, if a person shows the Shaligram form of the Lord or any form of the deity simply with the view to make money, then he is seeing the deity not as the Lord but as a stone, a means for earning his livelihood. Abhay had the opportunity to see his spiritual master deal with the nationalist Subhash Chandra Bose, who had been Abhay's schoolmate at Scottish Churches College. Bose had come in a somewhat critical mood, concerned about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's recruiting young men into religious life. Srila Prabhupada, Subhash Chandra Bose came to my Guru Maharaj and said, "So many people you have captured. They are doing nothing for nationalism." My Guru Maharaj replied, "Well, for your national propaganda, you require very strong men. But these people are very weak. You can see. They are very skinny. So don't put your glance upon them. Let them eat something and chant Hare Krishna." In this way, he avoided him. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used to say that when the day came when high court judges were devotees of Krishna with Vaishnava tilak on their foreheads, then he would know that the mission of spreading Krishna consciousness was becoming successful. He said that Jesus Christ was a Shaktiya Vesha avatar, an empowered incarnation of God. How can it be otherwise? He said he sacrificed everything for God. In his scholarly language, he declared, the materialistic demeanor cannot possibly stretch to the transcendental autocrat, but sometimes, in speech, he phrased it in a more down to earth way. The mundane scholars who are trying to understand the Supreme Lord by their senses and mental speculation are like a person trying to taste the honey in a bottle by licking the outside of the bottle. Philosophy without religion, he said, is dry speculation, and religion without philosophy is sentiment and sometimes fanaticism. Srila Bhakti Siddhant said that the whole world was simply a society of cheaters and cheated. He gave the example that loose women often visit certain holy places in India with the idea of seducing the sadhus, thinking that to have a child by a sadhu is prestigious. And immoral men dress themselves as sadhus, hoping to be seduced by the cheating women. His conclusion: a person should aspire to leave the material world and go back to Godhead because this material world is not a fit place for a gentleman. Abbe saw that when disciples asked his spiritual master about something in the future, he never replied, "Yes, it is going to happen," or "Yes, we are going to do it." Rather, he would say, "Yes, if Krishna desires, it may be." Although in his younger years he had been an astrologer and able to predict the future, he had given it up. Srila Bhakti Siddhant was a lifetime brahmachari and was very strict about avoiding association with women. Once Abhay was sitting with his spiritual master when another disciple was present along with his young wife. The wife asked Srila Bhakti Siddhant if she might speak with him privately, but he replied, "No, whatever it is, you can ask here. I cannot see you in private." Abhay was impressed by this. Since Srila Bhakti Siddhant was in his 60s and the girl could have been his granddaughter, regardless, he would not speak with any women alone. Srila Bhakti Siddhant liked to make his disciples into sannyasis, but one day one of his sannyasa disciples was forcibly dragged away by his wife. In tears, Srila Bhakti Siddhant lamented that he was unable to save that soul. Yet he did not speak disparagingly of Krishna conscious family life. "I would have sex hundreds of times if I thought that I could raise Krishna conscious children." He would send his brahmacharis out to sell the Gaudiya Math magazine and books, and even if a brahmachari were able to sell only one or two, it would please him very much, and he would exclaim, "You are so nice." In considering whether essays were worthy for publication, he would count how many times the word Krishna or Chaitanya had been used. If these holy names had been quoted sufficiently, he would say, "That's all right, this can be used." He would say in Bengali, "Pran ache yaar se hetu prachar." A person must have life to be a preacher. A dead man cannot preach. When some of his preachers who had gone to chant and speak reported that no one had attended their meeting, Srila Bhakti Siddhant replied, "That doesn't matter. The four walls will hear you. That is sufficient. Don't be disappointed. Go on chanting." And in commenting on the fact that some of his disciples had fallen away, "Some of the soldiers will die," he said. But he did not want his disciples to lead an easy-going life. He once criticized a disciple as being ease loving, nor should they attempt to practice austerities in seclusion. He would sing a song of his own composition, "Mana Tumi Kiser Vaishnava." My dear mind, what kind of Vaishnava are you? You are chanting Hare Krishna in a solitary place, imitating the great saints Haridas Thakur and Rup Goswami, but your meditation is actually to think of women and money. Your mind is filled with such dirty things, so your bhajana is simply cheating. He taught that if a devotee gave up his preaching in the city in favor of solitary meditation, that was a method of cheating by imitating the great saints in hope of getting cheap adoration from others. Therefore, Srila Bhakti Siddhant never liked to open a branch of the Gaudiya Math in a place that was not very much populated. Abhay went on listening to his spiritual master at every opportunity, but rarely did Abhay put a philosophical inquiry before him. He preferred simply to listen. Srila Prabhupada: "I never asked my spiritual master a question except one: how shall I serve you?" Abhay Charan Dev became prominent in the pharmaceutical business. He worked well for Bose's laboratory, and other companies wanted him as their agent. He had hopes of becoming rich. Srila Prabhupada, my Guru Maharaj ordered me, "You do this," but I thought, let me first of all become a rich man, then I shall do. In the beginning, I was thinking, now my god brothers have taken sannyas. They are begging from door to door. Why shall I beg? Let me earn money and start Krishna consciousness. The biggest pharmaceutical company in India, Bengal Chemical, made him an offer, but when they did not fulfill all his conditions, he turned them down, though later he regretted it. Still there were good signs. The astrologer had predicted he could become one of India's richest men, and Dr. Karthik Bose had told his father-in-law he's a very intelligent man. But there were also other signs. As many accounts as he had secured by his wide travels, there were also that many bills to collect. Many of the accounts began to fall behind in their payments, and the accumulated debt began to grow until he owed Bose's laboratory a total of 10,000 rupees, and Abe had enemies. The manager who had taken over Abe's old position as officer manager with Bose's laboratory in Calcutta, tried to turn Dr. Bose against Abe, insinuating that he was too independent. They had heard of his negotiating with Bengal Chemical, and the new manager attributed the accumulating debt to Abe's lack of loyalty to the Home Office. Karthik Bose remained favorably inclined towards Abe, but when the debt became a financial strain, he went to Allahabad to investigate. At Prayag Pharmacy, he spoke with Dr. Ghosh, who told him, "He is a very honest man. It is no fault of his. In good faith, he gave all these chemists drugs and credit, but he can't realize the money." "All right," Dr. Bose said, "but I can't go on giving him money." Abe went over the accounts with Dr. Karthik Bose, and they both agreed that the best way to settle the matter was for Dr. Bose to take over the Prayag pharmacy and all of Abe's account. Thus Abe was absolved of debt but unemployed. Adulananda Brahmachari approached him. "Why don't you come to the Math? Now you are free." Abe began to visit more frequently the nearby Rup Goswami Math, where the Gaudiya Math men, in their renounced Brahmachari spirit, suggested that he depend completely on Krishna, give up the world, move in with them, and become a full time preacher. But for Abe, there was no question of abandoning business. If he did, what would happen to his wife and children? He and Radharani now had a third child, a son, so the financial responsibility was increasing. The brahmacharis were intentioned in asking him to renounce the world, and it was fine for them to do so, but Abhay could not take it very seriously. Without work, he was in critical situation, but he remained confident and eager to take on new employment. There were other companies that would like to have him as their agent, and some of his old customers wanted him to service them, even if he were not Bose's man. Abhay thought about starting his own pharmaceutical laboratory. Finally, he decided he would start his own factory, but in a much bigger city than Allahabad. He settled on Bombay. He decided that his family should remain in Allahabad, and he and his brother would travel to Bombay, take an apartment, and survey the prospects for starting a factory there. Although Radharani was used to her husband's traveling, it had never been as extended as this promised to be. Abe talked with her, explaining that his recent business loss had been the arrangement of Krishna. Now, again, to provide for his family, he would have to start a large business, and that could best be done in a major city like Bombay. But family life in Allahabad would be temporarily disrupted. He set up a very small pharmaceutical manufacturing operation there in Allahabad, put his nephew Tulasi in charge, and left for Bombay with his brother. In Bombay, Abhay rented an apartment on Grant Road, and applying the knowledge he had gained as manager of Bose's laboratory, started his own pharmaceutical factory. Business was going well when a large company, Smith Institute, wanted him as their sales agent. Abe took the job thinking that he could earn money as Smith's representative while at the same time developing his own business. He was confident of his ability to earn money in the pharmaceutical line. While traveling around Bombay on business, Abe met some members of the Gaudiya Math, Bhak- Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Goswami, senior sannyasi disciples of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Abe recognized them as respected god brothers, well versed in the scriptures and Vaishnava philosophy. It seemed he was destined to find his god brothers wherever he went. Both he and the sannyasis regarded their apparently odd meeting in the city as auspicious. Like the members of Gaudiya Math he had met in Allahabad, these preachers had no permanent center, but they were trying to start one. On behalf of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, they were going door to door soliciting supporters for a Bombay branch of the Gaudiya Math. Abhay wanted to help. As a fellow god brother in the service of his spiritual master, he offered them his services. Although as sannyasis, they were in superior position. In their somewhat helpless condition, they looked up to Abhay for help. They had been staying in a small place on Proctor Road and had found little opportunity to make important contacts. Now they formed a team, Abhay introducing the sannyasis to business acquaintances and the sannyasis taking donations for the new center. Abhay Charnarvinda was good at collecting funds and he willingly gave his time. Again, his god brothers began pulling at him to participate fully in the Gaudiya Math preaching. Srila Prabhupada, we made a party for collecting alms. Sridhar Maharaj, Goswami Maharaj, and myself. I took them to some of my chemist and doctor friends, and in 2 days we collected 500 rupees. Sridhar Maharaj would speak. I would introduce, and Goswami Maharaj would canvass. So Goswami Maharaj very much appreciated and he began to speak highly about me. For a Babu, he is so expert. He has got so many friends and he has collected so much. Why should he not be in charge of our matha? Why shouldn't he live with us? Why is he living separately? Abhay visited the Math quarters on Proctor Road, where he joined the devotees in Kirtan and heard them speak from the Bhagavatam. At the sannyasi's request, Abhay took on the responsibility of finding a more suitable place for the Bombay Center. Wherever he went in the city, he looked for likely locations, just as he had responsibilities for his wife and family in Allahabad by dint of his initiation. He was responsibly bound to assist his god brothers. He had to take part in the preaching, not simply struggle so that he might exist in the world of business competition. But he did not think he could ever live like the sannyasis. No possessions, no business, sleeping on the bare floor, taking only simple meals. February 25, 1935. It was the 62nd birthday of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati at Jagannath Puri, where Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was residing. The devotees observed the day with ceremony. At the small Bombay center, the few disciples planned an evening observance and invited local people. For the occasion, Abhay wrote a poem. Adore, adore ye all, the happy day, blessed than heaven, sweeter than May, when he appeared at Puri, the holy place, my Lord and Master, his divine grace. O my Master, the evangelic angel, give us thy light, light up thy candle, struggle for existence, a human race, the only hope, his divine grace. Misled we are, all going astray, save us, Lord, our fervent pray, wonder thy ways, to turn our face, adore thy feet, your divine grace. Forgotten Krishna, we fallen souls, paying most heavy the illusion's toll, darkness around, all untrans, the only hope, his divine grace. Message of service, thou hast brought a healthful life as Chaitanya wrought, unknown to all, it's full of praise, that's your gift, your divine grace. Absolute is sentient, though host proved. Impersonal calamity, though host moved. This gives us a life, a new and fresh. Worship thy feet, your divine grace. Had you not come who had told the message of Krishna, forceful and bold, that's your right. You have the mace, save me a fallen, your divine grace. The line of service, as drawn by you, is pleasing and healthy like morning dew, the oldest of all, but in new dress, miracle done, your divine grace. Abhay Charan Das. Abhay also composed a speech which he read before the assembled guests and members of the Gaudiya Math. Although his first language was Bengali, his English was clear and natural. Gentlemen, the offerings of such a homage he has been arranged this evening to the Acharya Deva is not a sectarian concern, because when we speak of the fundamental principle of Gurudeva or Acharya Dev, we speak of something that is of universal application. There does not arise any question of discriminating my Guru from that of yours or anyone else's. There is only one Guru who appears in an infinity of forms to teach you, me and all others. The Guru or Acharya Deva, as we learn from the bona fide scriptures, delivers the message of the absolute world. I mean the transcendental abode of the absolute personality, where everything non differentially serves the absolute truth. Like the poem, the speech was personal, but even more than the poem, it was authoritative, philosophical preaching. The God brothers were impressed to hear Abhay presenting the Vaishnava philosophy so expertly. How was it possible? Of course, it should not have come as a surprise. He had heard the Vaishnava philosophy from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, just like his God brothers. Why should he not be able to enunciate the teachings of his spiritual master, having heard from him and having read Gita and Bhagavatam and Bhakti Rasimrit Sindhu? Was he not a devotee in the parampara? But until now, no one knew he could preach in English so expertly. Abhay's speech continues. Therefore, if the absolute truth is one, about which we think there is no difference of opinion, the Guru also cannot be two. The Acharya Deva, to whom we have assembled tonight to offer our humble homage, is not the Guru of a sectarian institution or one out of many differing exponents of the truth. On the contrary, he is the Jagat Guru or the Guru of all of us. The only difference is that some obey him wholeheartedly while others do not obey him directly. The Guru of whom Abhay spoke, of course, was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the representative of the original compiler of the scriptures, Vyasdev. Abhay explained how Lord Krishna had delivered transcendental knowledge to Brahma, the creator of this particular universe. From Brahma, the knowledge had descended to Narad, from Narada to Vyas, from Vyasa to Madhav, because Srila Bhakti Siddhant was presenting the Vedic knowledge as it is, without any interpretation in parampara. He was the bona fide Acharya who could enlighten others with the revealed knowledge of the Vedas. Abhay continued. Gentlemen, our knowledge is so poor, our senses are so imperfect, and our sources are so limited that it is not possible for us to have even the slightest knowledge of the absolute region without surrendering ourselves at the lotus feet of Sri Vyasadev or his bona fide representative. This transcendental knowledge, Abhay explained, had been known in India for thousands of years, and this knowledge, although presently obscured, was India's real gift to the world. Abhay continued. We must conclude that the darkness of the present age is not due to lack of material advancement, but that we have lost the clue to our spiritual advancement, which is the prime necessity of human life and the criterion of the highest type of civilization. Throwing of bombs from aeroplanes is no advancement of civilization from the primitive, uncivilized way of dropping big stones on the heads of the enemies from the top of the hills. Improvement of the art of killing our neighbors by inventing machine guns and by means of poisonous gases is certainly no advancement from primitive barbarism priding itself on its art of killing by bows and arrows, nor does the development of a sense of pampered selfishness prove anything more than intellectual animalism. Thus, while others were yet in the womb of historical oblivion, the sages of India had developed a different kind of civilization which enables us to know ourselves. They had discovered that we are not at all material entities, but that we are all spiritual, permanent, and non destructible servants of the Absolute. The speech continued, describing the horrible consequences of a missapient human life, the sufferings of repeated birth and death. Again and again, Abe stressed the need to surrender to the spiritual master. He criticized empirical, mundane philosophers, godless politicians, and blind sense gratifiers. He repeatedly pointed to the soul's natural and sublime position as the servant of God and as the servant of the pure devotee of God. Abhay, an initiated disciple of his spiritual master for a little more than 2 years, referring to himself as a student, continued. Gentlemen, although we are like ignorant children in the knowledge of the transcendence, still His Divine Grace, my Gurudeva, has kindled a small fire within us to dissipate the invincible darkness of the empirical knowledge, and we are so much so on the safe side that no amount of philosophical argument of the empiric schools of thought can deviate us an inch from the position of our eternal dependence on the lotus feet of His divine grace, and we are prepared to challenge the most erudite scholars of the Mayavad schools on this vital issue that the personality of Godhead and His transcendental sports in Goloka alone constitute the sublime information of the Vedas. He then ended his speech with an eloquent prayer of submission. Personally, I have no hope to have any direct service for the coming crores of births of the sojourn of my life, but I am confident that some day or other I shall be delivered from this mire of delusion in which I am at present so deeply sunk. Therefore, let me with all my earnestness pray at the lotus feet of my divine Master to let me suffer the lot which I am destined to do for all my past misdoings, but to let me have this power of recollection that I am nothing but a tiny servant of the Almighty Absolute Godhead, realized through the unflinching mercy of my Divine Master. Let me, therefore, bow down at His lotus feet with all the humility at my command. Abhay submitted both the poem and speech to the harmonist. The poem, Abhay's first publication, announced him as a competent writer in English, and Swami Bhakti Pradipa Tirath, editor of the Harmonist, informally dubbed Abhay as Kavi, learned poet. Some of the Abhay's godbrothers also picked up on the name and began calling him Kavi. Most of them, even the sannyasis, were not so proficient in English. But Abhay was not ordinary. They could appreciate that the poem was personal, written out of Abhay's genuine worship and his joy at having accepted a genuine spiritual master, but it was also written strictly in accord with the conclusions of the scriptures. For Abhay, however, the glory of his Sri Vyas Puja homage came when the poem reached Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and it gave him pleasure. One stanza specifically made Srila Bhakti Siddhant so happy that he made a point of showing it to all of his guests. Absolute is sentient, though host proved, impersonal calamity, though hast moved. Somehow, in this simple couplet, Abhay had captured the essence of his spiritual master's preaching against the Mayavadis, and Srila Bhakti Siddhant took it as an indication of how well Abhay knew the mind of his Gurudeva. Abhay was delighted when he heard that the couplet was pleasing to his spiritual master. One of Abhay's godbrother compared this verse by Abhay to a verse in which Rupa Goswami had expressed the inner thinking of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and had thus moved him to ecstasy. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati also found the essay pleasing, and he showed it to some of his confidential devotees. He instructed the editor of the Harmonist, Whatever he writes, publish it. Abhay thought it only natural that he should have many business enemies or competitors. It was a sign of success. But his Bombay competition caused him to lose another good chance to become wealthy. The enemy was the son of Abhay's supervisor at Smith Institute. Both son and father complained to the Smith Institute executives that Abhay Charan Day was pushing goods from his own laboratory and not Smith's. By this intrigue, Abhay lost his position with Smith Institute and his supervisor placed his own son as the new agent. Abhay was again on his own. While continuing to help his sannyasi godbrother in Bombay, he found a two-story building for rent at Galia Tank Road. Everyone agreed it would make a suitable center, and Abhay arranged for the rental and for initial repairs and helped the sannyasis move in. It seemed that his endeavors for spiritual things were always successful, whereas his business efforts were consistently failing. Of course, a few business enemies were no cause for discouragement. Intrigues and losses were always part of the game and he was still well known in the pharmaceutical business throughout India. But it wasn't so much the give and take of business that disturbed him as his own doubts about whether this was the best way for him to serve his spiritual master. Business was good only if it could go side by side with his spiritual life. Lord Chaitanya had said that the chanting of Hare Krishna should be spread to every town and village, and Abhay wanted to assist his spiritual master in fulfilling that prophecy, especially by contributing money and helping establish centers. His earnings should not go solely for his family. Ideally, family life and spiritual life should progress side by side. But the difficulty was Abhay's wife. She was disturbed over the business losses and apathetic to the spiritual successes. She wanted to stay within the orbit of home and family, and despite Abhay's suggestion, she refused to accept initiation from Srila Bhakti Siddhant. It was his own wife who was his most formidable competitor, and she waged her opposition right in the home where it was least welcome. When Abhay occasionally visited his family in Allahabad, he tried to satisfy them with his good intentions. Business had not gone so well in Bombay, but he had new plans, and he assured his family that there was no need to worry. He planned to do more preaching in his home. The whole family could become more involved in spiritual activities. He wanted to invite guests, hold discussions on Bhagavad Gita and Shrimad Bhagavatam, perform kirtan, distribute prasadam. He wanted to preach just as his spiritual master and god brothers were preaching. Such a program would not require that a sannyasi or brahmachari come and preside. Abhay could do it himself. This would be an example of the ideal household life. But Radharani was unsubmissive. Rather than coming to hear him speak, she stayed with the children in another room taking tea. In Bombay, Abhay associated with Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Sarang Goswami. Both sannyasis were highly literate scholars. Sridhar Maharaj was respected for his erudition in the Shastras, and Bhakti Sarang Goswami for his writing and preaching in English. Sometimes Abhay would discuss his realizations with them. Abhay also studied the scriptures on his own. His spiritual master's commentary on the Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam as well as commentaries by the previous acharyas. While reading Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on Bhagavad Gita, second chapter 41st verse, he read that the disciple should consider the order of the spiritual master to be his life and soul. These words produced a deep effect on Abhay, strengthening his desire to execute Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's command. And in the 88th chapter of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, he came upon a verse in which Lord Krishna said something that startled him. Yasya yaham anugrehanami harisya tad dhanam sanehe tato dhanamam त्यजयन्ति अस्य स्वजना दुःखा दुःखितम. When I feel especially mercifully disposed towards someone, I gradually take away all his material possessions. His friends and relatives then reject this poverty stricken and most wretched fellow. Abe shuddered as he read the verse. It seemed to speak directly to him, but what did it mean? Does it mean, he thought, that Krishna will take away all my money? Was that what was actually happening? Was that why his business plans were failing? He discussed the meaning of the verse with Sridhar Maharaj. Yes, Sridhar Maharaj confirmed. This might very well be what was happening between Lord Krishna and Abhi. In July 1935, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati came to install the deity of Lord Krishna and to institute deity worship at the Bombay Center. He was pleased with what his disciples had done so far, and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj admitted that much of the work was due to Abhay Babu, who had collected funds and established the new center. Why is Abhay living separately? Bhakti Saranga asked. He should be president of this Bombay center. Bhakti Siddhant Saraswati replied, it is better that he is living outside your company. He will do. When the time comes, he will do everything himself. You don't have to recommend him. Abhay had not been present when this was spoken, but his godbrothers told him what Srila Bhakti Siddhant had said. These words of his spiritual master, with their mysteriously prophetic air, were important to Abhay. He treasured the words within himself and meditated upon their meaning. In November 1935, he was again with his spiritual master in Vrindavan. It was the Kartik season, the ideal time to visit Vrindavan, and Srila Bhakti Siddhant was staying for a month with his disciples at peaceful Radha Kund, the sacred lake where Radha and Krishna used to sport. After leaving Bombay in July, Bhakti Siddhant Saraswati had gone to Calcutta, where he had spoken on radio, delivered many public lectures, welcomed back the preachers he had sent to Europe, and finished publishing his Srimad Bhagavatam translation and commentary. Then in October he had come to Radhakunda, occupying the small one-story house Bhakti Vinod Thakur had constructed. He had been reading and speaking to the assembled devotees on the Upanishads, Chaitanya Charitamrit and Srimad Bhagavatam. He had also installed deities at Shri Kunja Vihari Mutt. The banks of Radha Kund were overhung with bright green foliage growing from the gnarled branches of ancient tamarind, tamala, and neem trees. In the shallows of the water, cranes stood on stilt like legs while rivers' terns skimmed across the lake, sometimes abruptly diving for fish. Sometimes a tortoise would poke its nose up from the water's depth or a fish would jump. Green parrots, usually in pairs, flew in and out of the green trees, and sparrows chirped and hopped from place to place. Peacocks were also there, mostly in nearby gardens, as were occasional rabbits and even deer. The atmosphere was enriched with the history of Krishna Lila. 5,000 years ago, Radha and Krishna had engaged in transcendental pastimes here, and only 500 years ago, Lord Chaitanya had rediscovered Radhakunda. Lord Chaitanya's great follower, Raghunath Das Goswami, had resided here for many years, constantly chanting Hare Krishna and discussing the activities of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And here, in a small bhajan kutir, Krishna Das Kaviraj had written Chaitanya Charitamrit, the narrative of the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya that Bhakti Siddhant Saraswati relished so much. Many of the inhabitants at Radhakunda were Babajis living in small bhajan kutirs and spending their time chanting Hare Krishna. Having heard of his spiritual master's stay here, Abhay, bringing his son with him, had travelled from Bombay just to have darshan of his spiritual master. To see Srila Bhakti Siddhant was always an occasion for jubilation, but to see him in Vrindavan was an added perfection. This meeting with his beloved guide and friend was different from the time in 1932 when Abhay had seen him on the Vrindavan Parikrama. Now Abhay was no longer sitting anonymously in the back of a room. Now he was a bona fide disciple, recognized as the Kavi who had written the praiseworthy poem and essay The Young Man Who Listened Well, the devotee who had helped the Allahabad Mutt and who had established the Mutt in Bombay. Already on this visit, Abhay had occasion to be alone with his spiritual master, who had remembered Abhay's son and presented him with the small bandhi jacket. And now, as they walked together alone on the bank of Radhakund, Srila Bhakti Siddhant turned and spoke confidentially to Abhay. There had been some quarreling amongst his leading disciples in Calcutta, he said, and this distressed him very much. Even now, in Vrindavan, it weighed heavily on his mind. Some of his disciples had been fighting over who would use various rooms and facilities at the Gaudiya Mutt headquarters in Calcutta. These devotees were all members of the same Matha, and the building was for propagating Krishna consciousness under the leadership of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Yet, even in their spiritual masters' presence, they were quarreling. Brahmanas and Vaishnavas were supposed to be free from envy of any creature, what to speak of envy of one another. If they were to fight now, what would they do after their spiritual master passed away? Abhay had no part in these matters and did not even know the details or who was involved. But as he listened to his spiritual master, he also became distressed. Deeply concerned, Srila Bhakti Siddhant said to Abhay, Agun Jwalbe, there will be fire. One day there would be fire in the Calcutta Gaudiya Mutt, and that fire of party interests would spread and destroy. Abhay heard but did not know what to make of it. Srila Bhakti Siddhant had fought so long and boldly to establish that anyone of any birth could be elevated to become a Brahmana, a sannyasi, or a Vaishnava. But if his followers became contaminated by a little wealth and the desire for prestige, thereby showing themselves to be still low class men despite their training and purification, then his mission would be disrupted. If, in the name of religion, they became attached to ease, position, and prestige, it could only mean that they had failed to grasp the teachings of their spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada, he was lamenting that these men are simply after the stones and bricks of the building he condemned. He was very, very sorry. When we were living in a rented house, Srila Bhakti Siddhant said, if we could collect 200 or 300 rupees, we were living very nicely at Ultdanga. We were happier then. But since we have been given this marble palace in Bhagwazar, there is friction between our men. Who will occupy this room? Who will occupy that room? Who will be the proprietor of this room? Everyone is planning in different way. It would be better to take the marble from the walls and secure money. If I could do this and print books, that would be better. Abhay felt his spiritual master speaking to him in urgency, as if asking him for help or warning him to avert a disaster. But what could he do? Srila Bhakti Siddhant then said directly to Abhay, Amar Icha Chila Kichu Bai Karna. I had a desire to print some books. If you ever get money, print books. Standing by Radhakund and beholding his spiritual master, Abhay felt the words deeply enter his own life. If you ever get money, print books. December 1936. Srila Bhakti Siddhant was in poor health at Jagannath Puri. Abhay was in Bombay and he wanted to write his Guru Maharaj a letter. He is a little kind upon me, Abhay thought. He will understand my request and he began to write. Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances at your lotus feet. You have got many disciples and I am one of them, but they are doing direct service to you. Some of them are brahmacharis, some of them are sannyasis, but I am a householder. I cannot. Sometimes I give monetary help while I cannot give you direct service. Is there any particular service I can do? 2 weeks later, Abhay received a reply. I am fully confident that you can explain in English our thoughts and arguments to the people who are not conversant with the languages of the other members. This will do much good to yourself as well as your audience. I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher, if you serve the mission to inculcate the noble impression of Lord Chaitanya's teachings in the people in general, as well as philosophers and religionists. Abe at once recognized this to be the same instruction he had received at their first meeting in 1922. He took it as a confirmation. There was now no doubt as to the purpose of his life. What his spiritual master had said in Calcutta in 1922 had not been a chance remark, nor had that been a chance meeting. The instruction was the same. Turn yourself into a very good English preacher. This will do much good to yourself as well as your audience. Srila Bhakti Siddhant passed away from the mortal world on January 1, 1937. He had been spending his last days reading Chaitanya Charitamrit and chanting on his beads. When a doctor had visited him, wanting to give him an injection, Srila Bhakti Siddhant had protested. Why are you disturbing me in this way? Simply chant Hare Krishna, that's all. Amongst his last words to his disciples were, I advise all to preach the teachings of Rup Raghunatha, disciples of Lord Chaitanya, with all energy and resources. Our ultimate goal shall be to become the dust of the lotus feet of Sri Sri Rup and Raghunath Goswamis. You should all work conjointly under the guidance of your spiritual master with the view to serve the absolute knowledge, the personality of Godhead. You should live somehow or other without any quarrel in this mortal world only for the service of Godhead. Do not please give up the service of Godhead in spite of all dangers, all criticisms, and all discomforts. Do not be disappointed, for most people in the world do not serve the personality of Godhead. Do not give up your own service, which is your everything and all. Neither reject the process of chanting and hearing of the transcendental holy name of Godhead. You should always chant the transcendental name of Godhead with patience and forbearance like a tree and humbleness like a straw. There are many amongst you who are well qualified and able workers. We have no other desire whatsoever. In his last days, he had remained fully conscious and had given instructions until the end. He had specifically and openly ordered that the affairs of his Gaudiya Math be maintained by a 12-man governing body, which the devotees should select amongst themselves. Finally, he had said, Please accept my blessings to you all, present and absent. Please bear in mind that our sole duty and religion is to spread and propagate service to the Lord and of his devotees. At 5:30 a.m. on January 1, he breathed his last. Word very soon reached Abhay in Bombay. His immediate response was to cry with grief, no more the joy of an anticipated meeting, no more trips to Calcutta or Vrindavan on the plea of business, just to see the tall, commanding form of Srila Bhakti Siddhant, the evangelic angel. This sense of never meeting again was difficult to bear. Philosophically, Abhay knew that there was no reason to lament. Bhakti Siddhant Saraswati had come into the world to execute the mission of Lord Chaitanya, and now it was required that he leave this place and go to another, where he would again engage in the same activity. Yet, even armed with this philosophy, Abhay felt all alone. His two great well wishers were gone, his father and now his spiritual master. But he felt grateful that he had received a special mercy, a final instruction, just 2 weeks before his spiritual master's departure. Abhay read his letter again and again. There would not be another. The intimate talks and meetings were now gone, but by this letter especially Abhay would live in the instructions of Bhakti Siddhant Saraswati. The letter had come just in time. Now he knew for certain, no matter what anyone else said, how to please his spiritual master and stay linked with Krishna. Following his order, he would conquer the feelings of loss at the disappearance of his most affectionate well-wisher. Hare Krishna. So we have finished reading How Shall I Serve You chapter 4, and now we will start chapter 5, The War, next time. Hari Bol.
गोविन्द जय जय गोपाल जय जय गोविन्द जय जय गोपाल जय जय गोविन्द